If you're old enough to remember the majority of the 2000s, you probably remember an operating system called Windows Vista and the significant amount of negative press and opinions surrounding it. Perhaps you were even part of those who voiced their opinions against Microsoft's 2007 operating system upon its release. Well, today I'm going to be discussing the misconceptions, misunderstandings, and overall who is really to blame for the commercial failure of what is actually a fantastic operating system. Without further delay, I present to you the untold truth of Windows Vista. Before we get to why exactly Windows Vista was a commercial failure, we have to go all the way back to 2001 when development of Windows XP was almost complete, and development of what was to be the successor to XP, codenamed Windows Longhorn, began. Windows Longhorn was intended to be a minor upgrade to Windows XP, with another operating system, codenamed Blackcomb, later renamed to Vienna, and now known as Windows 7, to be released sometime after Longhorn. Development of Longhorn began using the Windows Server 2003 Release Candidate 1 codebase to build the operating system. As development continued, despite Microsoft intending for this to be an interim release, features that were originally planned for Blackcomb, such as WinFS, made their way into Longhorn. This resulted in the release date for Windows Longhorn being pushed back several times. This features first, refinement last approach caused Windows Longhorn to become an unstable, buggy mess of an operating system, resulting in the project ultimately being reset in 2004. This time around, and using the Windows Server 2003 Service Pack 1 codebase rather than the Release Candidate 1 code, Microsoft took a much more conservative and realistic approach to get the next version of Windows pushed out to consumers as quickly and efficiently as possible. As a result, many of the features originally in Windows Longhorn before the reset were cut or scaled down, which caused some upset among users who were excited for these new features, but it was ultimately the right decision as Microsoft had bitten off more than they could chew, so to speak. Finally, after 6 long years, Microsoft released Windows Vista to manufacturing on November 8, 2006, and to consumers on January 30th, 2007. But why exactly was this OS so widely criticized for various issues, such as stability, performance, and compatibility? The first reason is a new codebase. Windows Vista was essentially rebuilt from the ground up compared to its predecessor, Windows XP. Vista introduced a new driver model which caused existing drivers for Windows XP to no longer work with the new OS. In many cases, OEMs, rather than writing new drivers from scratch for Windows Vista as they should have done, tried to get away with reworking Windows XP drivers, hoping they would work with Windows Vista, since obviously there was no profitable gain from writing new drivers exclusively for the new OS. This resulted in a plethora of stability issues. Users who did not know any better placed the blame on Microsoft and Windows Vista for this, when the blame should have been put on the OEMs for not bothering to make their drivers compatible with Windows Vista and its new driver model. This rewriting of the kernel also caused a lot of older software to no longer work. Microsoft worked to remedy this by releasing service packs and hotfixes for Windows Vista. However, they unfortunately could not make it completely backwards compatible. The second reason is higher system requirements and inadequate hardware. Upon Vista's release, with new features came much steeper requirements than its predecessor, Windows XP. However, this had been the case with each version of Windows prior to Vista, with XP requiring more powerful hardware than its successors and facing criticism upon its release for this as well. Rather than building machines that were more than adequate to run it, OEMs again tried to cut costs and get away with slapping Windows Vista onto machines just barely within the system requirements, in addition to installing a plethora of their own software commonly referred to as OEM bloatware. This resulted in major performance problems, much of which was blamed on Windows Vista. To be fair, Microsoft was partially to blame for this, as they tried to get away with saying that 512 megabytes of RAM was adequate for Windows Vista, going as far as to brand some Windows XP computers being sold just before Vista's release as Windows Vista capable, which later resulted in a class action lawsuit against Microsoft, alleging that they had misled people into believing that these PCs could run the full experience of Windows Vista, such as Windows Vista Home Premium, Business, or Ultimate, when in reality they could only handle the more bare-bones version of the OS dubbed Windows Vista Home Basic. This created a recipe for disaster for Windows Vista's reputation, and many users vowed to stick with Windows XP indefinitely. And the third reason is Windows 7. As with every RTM or initial version of Windows whose changes are major and high in number compared to their predecessors, the RTM or original version of Windows Vista had its share of bugs, such as long network copy times. These issues, however, were ironed out with subsequent patches, and by the release of Service Pack 2 for Windows Vista, essentially all of these issues were ironed out. Unfortunately, by this time, the damage to Windows Vista's reputation had long been done. Microsoft had been working on a minor update to Windows Vista called Windows 7 shortly after Windows Vista's release in 2007. This new OS was now on the brink of completion, being released just 6 months after Windows Vista SP2 was available. By this time, OEMs had gotten their act together, so to speak, with machines being more than capable of running Vista being on store shelves, and drivers written with respect to the new driver model now being available. With Windows 7 being mainly a superficial change to Windows Vista to differentiate it from the latter, since Vista had now lost its marketability, these circumstances allowed Windows 7 to have a flawless release. Windows 7 kept the same driver model and codebase as Vista, which allowed it to benefit from all the work that had been done to make machines and drivers and software Windows Vista compatible. This gave many people, perhaps even you, the illusion that Windows 7 was a major and much needed improvement to Windows Vista, when in reality the hardware and drivers were mainly responsible for this much better experience compared to what users experienced with Windows Vista upon its release. Since most people fell under this impression, Windows Vista quickly became a distant memory, and its bad reputation was enough to make most people hold out on Windows XP until Windows 7 became available, which then allowed them to skip Windows Vista entirely. And finally, the conclusion. The truth is, Windows Vista is or was not a bad operating system at all, but rather significantly misunderstood, to the point where it was a commercial failure. Had Windows Vista been given more time to catch on before being replaced with Windows 7, would it have succeeded? I firmly believe so. What most users seem to have forgotten is that Windows XP suffered many of the same criticisms that Windows Vista did upon its release. XP was criticized for introducing the bloated and subjectively childish-looking Luna theme, higher system requirements than Windows 98 and Windows 2000, and also introducing the much-maligned product activation system. Despite all of this, Windows XP went on to be the world's most widely used desktop operating system, achieving over 80% market share at its peak in 2007, which by the way has yet to be beat, and attaining the respect and trust of most users. This came to be because Windows XP was without a successor for over 6 years, which allowed it to become a major success, to the point where even today some people are still holding out on the now 18-year-old operating system. Windows Vista was not allotted this same lengthy period of time to become popular, which resulted in it quickly becoming irrelevant just a few years after the release of Windows 7. Well, that's it, the untold truth of Windows Vista. Thank you all for watching, and if you didn't already have a positive opinion on the OS, hopefully this video helped shed some light on how Windows Vista is not nearly as bad of an operating system as you were led to believe.